Hello everyone, Dark of All Trades here. Now, as this channel grows, and thank you all for helping with that, I've been noticing that I have addressed arguments ranging from basic to complicated, from morality to the Big Bang, and from evolution to language. There isn't a lot I haven't touched on yet, though I am sure that there are things I haven't gone that deep into, as I typically address smaller channels looking at what the average religious content creator puts out. I see a lot of different ideas that stem from bigger channels, or that bigger channels have already dismissed as bad arguments. Take some time and look at what Answers in Genesis says about arguments that shouldn't be used by theists anymore. When even Answers in Genesis doesn't think your argument for the same God they believe in is good, it says something about that argument. Well, I've started covering some slightly larger channels, but I figured it was time to take on one of the most well-known channels for apologetics, and that is Frank Turek's Cross-Examined. A lot of what I've seen from Frank Turek is fairly basic level apologetics, but he has a way of using simple terms to talk to the average person. He comes off as intelligent, but speaks in a way that everyone can at least understand his words and usually find a very clear point. So I can see his appeal to someone who already believes in the God he puts forth. For those of you unaware, Frank Turek holds Q&A sessions after his talks and posts them online. He doesn't usually put forth any novel arguments, but there has to be some content in his stuff, right? Well, today we're going to look at a new video he put out in the last month titled, "Are You Still Waiting for Absolute Proof of God?" This title leads me to believe he may have an answer to this, and that piques my interest. So let's jump right in. I'm going to skip the intro as it is simply a snippet of what he has to say in the video, and we'll start right at the beginning of the question.
You make a pretty good case, especially the fine-tune argument. I don't see a way around it.
Okay, confession time. This is the argument I had the most difficulty with. It sounds very strong to the average person. The idea of fine-tuning in the universe, if you accept that it is the case, points pretty solidly to something. When I first heard this argument, I didn't know how to respond to it any more than the "how does this demonstrate a God" route. It took a bit of looking into to find out why this argument fails, and boy does it. I think that since most people don't investigate arguments like this, it seems to make intuitive sense to most people that this could be the case. So I'm not surprised that this gentleman doesn't see a way around it. I didn't at first either. Now is a different story. It fails just like every other argument fails. If you want more information on why it fails, check out Victor Stenger's book, The Fallacy of Fine-Tuning. But this video isn't about the fine-tuning argument, I don't think. So let's just move on.
But there are some people like Lawrence Krauss, right, was his name, from the video, who would say, we don't have evidence of God. Or in other words, we don't have absolute proof for God.
Evidence and absolute proof are most certainly not the same thing, at least in most circumstances. There are technically definitions of the word evidence that equate it with proof. However, when it comes to apologetics, counter-apologetics, philosophy, epistemology, etc., the term evidence typically means something along the lines of anything that indicates the truth of something, especially to the exclusion of other options. So I disagree vehemently with the asker here, as does Collins Dictionary, which in its first example explicitly states that evidence is not the same as absolute proof.
What would you say to people who, like atheists, who would say the burden of proof lies with theists and not with atheists?
I would say that depending on the meaning of the term atheist, then they are 100% correct. Atheists do not adopt a burden of proof on anything unless they're putting forth a positive claim. Strong atheists would adopt a burden of proof, but generally for the claim of theism, the burden of proof lies with the theist.
Well, when he says absolute proof, I'd ask, what do you mean by absolute proof?
I was worried he was going to go here. This is why I pointed out that evidence and absolute proof are different things. While it is important to understand what is meant by terms, in this case he said,
we don't have evidence of God. Or in other words, we don't have absolute proof for God.
So it seems like he's just talking about evidence.
To say for certain, for 100%.
Well, 100% certain. I'm not 100% certain that you exist. We could be in the Matrix, right? I mean, we could be. I mean, I don't think that's true, but it's possible we could be in the Matrix.
This is actually a correct answer. I would have said that we need to get rid of the notion of 100% certainty. Just remove that from your vocabulary entirely. Replace it with something like reasonable certainty. I give credit when the apologist gets something right. Frank Turek is absolutely right on this point. Though we could be in the Matrix is a way of stating that there is no solution to the problem of hard solipsism, we can be reasonably certain that we are not in the Matrix, or even if we were, we act as if we are not. Hard solipsism is an unfalsifiable idea, and so we discard it. We can have certainty as close to 100% as possible, though it can never actually be 100% if we're being entirely honest.
So I'm not looking for 100% certainty. I'm looking for certainty beyond a reasonable doubt.
While Frank is correct, I don't think he's being 100%, there it is again, honest, or at least not logically consistent with other beliefs. Maybe he just isn't being skeptical and, like arguably all theists, he starts with his conclusion. I've watched atheists give him arguments that show a reasonable doubt, but he doesn't seem to accept them for some reason.
And let me give you an analogy of this. I know atheists are fond of saying, well, I just lack a belief in God, and you have all the burden of proof to say that God exists. I put up some evidence here earlier today that, okay, for example, the universe had a beginning and it's fine-tuned.
The local presentation of the universe had a beginning. You don't know what was before the Big Bang, if that is even a coherent idea. And the universe is as fine-tuned as a puddle is fine-tuned to fit in the hole in the pavement. But again, this isn't about the universe being fine-tuned. That is a different argument.
I was about to talk about the moral argument. Let's just take those three arguments. The argument that the universe had a beginning, the argument that it's fine-tuned and life is designed as well, and the argument there are objective moral values.
These are typically Frank's main talking points. Technically, these are four arguments, as the universe being fine-tuned and the idea that life is designed are separate arguments, even if they can be connected. Granted, these arguments are strong if you don't think about them at all. They make intuitive sense unless you think about them for just a moment. Again, rather than pick apart these arguments as I and many others have done before, let's just keep moving.
These, to me, seem like they're evidence for a theistic God.
To someone else, they may seem like they're evidence for a non-theistic explanation, or they may seem to them like they're evidence that no God exists. It seems to me that you're wrong.
Spaceless, timeless, immaterial, powerful, moral, personal, intelligent creator who created and sustains all things, right? I'm giving that evidence. I'm now going to ask the atheist, if there is no God, how do you explain these things, these truths?
And here we are at the shifting of the burden of proof. If we grant that everything you listed exists, which I very much don't, it is not up to the atheist to give any explanation as to why any of it exists. If the atheist doesn't have an answer, it doesn't make your explanation any more correct. You still have the burden to justify your explanation. Of course, we have explanations for why everything on your list that exists does exist. I know you've been giving completely secular explanations countless times. You just dismiss it because why? You start with your conclusion.
I mean, Lawrence Krauss admits that there was a beginning to the universe. Now, he tries to come up, as I say, with this argument that the universe came from nothing and by nothing without a cause.
No, he didn't. To the extent that he did, his meaning of nothing is not the same as yours, which you're using to try to make his argument unreasonable. I covered this a few times already, so I'm not going to go into this idea of nothing in this video. Go read Lawrence Krauss's book, A Universe from Nothing, if you want more information directly from the source.
But his nothing is not nothing, as we've seen. It's actually something.
Oh, well, color me pleasantly surprised. You actually got it right here. Let's see if he messes it up.
So his argument doesn't work.
You know, I should have let him finish that sentence before being pleasantly surprised. No, Frank, his argument still works. Your desire to push nothing as a state of things is what doesn't work.
So I would ask Lawrence Krauss, well, what argument do you have for the universe existing and the fact that it's fine-tuned and the fact there are objective moral values out there? I don't just have the burden of proof to say that God is the cause. I do, if I'm going to say God exists, have to give those arguments. But once those arguments are on the table, once these realities are on the table, then he has, if he's going to be someone who's looking for the truth, he has just as much burden to explain how these things could exist in the absence of God.
No, he doesn't. Like I said before, the idea of something existing does not require an explanation, or yours is just correct by default. If no one else had any other explanation for why the universe exists, then you are no closer to being correct. You still need to demonstrate your claim of a god. Of course, I've watched plenty of videos where you try, and of course, all of your arguments have fatal flaws, as even non-philosophers can and have pointed out. Why do these things exist? Well, Frank, it is just magic. There, that argument is no more ridiculous than yours, and that is effectively what your argument is. For anything and everything you claim your god does, your god is indistinguishable from magic. If there's interest in me making a video specifically on my take on these arguments, let me know in the comments. This is kindergarten level apologetics of, I don't know how this could be without God, therefore God. Entirely an argument from personal incredulity, or as listed in the Skeptic's Dictionary, the divine fallacy. And that's it for his video. So what was the question and answer in simple terms? The question was, what would you say to people who say the burden of proof lies with theists? Frank Turek's answer was, some things exist, so how does anyone justify the existence of those things without invoking a god? Technically, his answer isn't wrong, since the question was about what Frank would say in response to the placing of the burden of proof. That doesn't make the content of his answer correct, or even a good response. That's it for this one. What did you think? Do you think that Frank put forth a good answer? Or do you think that the idea that he has arguments doesn't take the burden of proof away from theists? Let me know in the comments below. This video is a bit less academic than I usually do, but that is simply because Frank here didn't put forth anything academic for me to respond to. This is basically, God exists, prove me wrong. As a bonus, I'm interested in what you guys think of his 3 to 4 arguments. Put your thoughts on one or multiple of them in the comments. I have my own answers, but I want to see where we agree and how our responses to them may differ. As we know, there are arguments about whether something exists or not, and I would put the burden on all of you to hit the like button, confirming to the world, or at least the YouTube world, that this video exists. Though if you haven't already, you can investigate the local presentation of my channel by hitting the subscribe button. Special thanks to my Patreons, Long-Haired Lefty, and Jammin' Bomb. If you'd like to exist in the matrix that is my channel, as well as get access to some exclusive content like a new series I'm starting, you can join them at patreon.com/darkofalltrades. And as always, keep learning.